Updates that we have for you, but now would like to move over and just have a discussion regarding the big announcement that was made by NASA presidential flag bearer, and that is Raila Amolo Odinga. And joining me on set this morning to have that conversation, I have Mr. Peter Wanyama, who is a lawyer and also a political analyst. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Morning.
You're close to me so I can shake your hand.
Yeah.
I'll just wave. To John Kagushia, who is a governance expert. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. And well, the nation waited with bated breath for the big announcement from the NASA fraternity. Let me start with, well, the question. John Kagushia, was the announcement big enough for you? For the wait?
Probably not as big as maybe what people would have expected. But then it's laudable. It's something that is very welcome to Kenyans. In fact, I would want to congratulate the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, for having chosen to take the right route because this country is supposed to be governed through the rule of law. And having gone to the Supreme Court, really, he has done the right thing. And I also take note that he asked his followers and supporters to be peaceful. That is something which is desirable, especially looking at the fact that we have already gone back to our normal lives and people really want to, do what they do every day for their own daily bread. And for having now given us that gift of ensuring that we as Kenyans now can proceed on with our work and our business and our lives, and then he goes to the Supreme Court, and then we allow the institutions that are created by the Constitution to take charge of the electoral dispute. That really is a positive thing. It's something that we really need to thank the opposition for.
To applaud.
Yeah.
All right, coming to you, Peter, your thoughts on the announcement and whether it is what you expected, given the tension that possibly the country felt as we're waiting for the big announcement.
Thank you very much. I agree with what my colleague has said, but with two exceptions. One is that I don't think the decision of Raila Odinga to announce that he's going to the Supreme Court should be viewed as a gift. Secondly, we should not be congratulating him for taking that move.
For doing what is basically minimal.
Exactly.
In terms of following the law.
Exactly, and my justification for that is that really we are a constitutional democracy, where we are governed by the rule of law, and therefore players in the electoral process must be ready and willing to be subjected to the mechanisms in that particular process for dispute resolution. So it cannot be that we do what we call cherry picking our options, and we determine which one fits our political circumstances. So we really must develop that culture, and the culture is that if you participate in a competitive political process, then really the bare minimum that we expect of you is to
follow that.
Again, follow the tenets.
John, you want to respond to that?
Mike, if once Raila Odinga lost the election, he actually went to court, then it would be seen as a normal process. It would have been something that it's acceptable and not anything to congratulate him about. But considering what happened after the loss in the last election, and having heard Orengo saying that going to the court is not an option for them. And of course, having even the international players putting a lot of pressure on the opposition to go to court. And of course, Kenyans were waiting with a lot of tension and anxiety for this process. And because they were not sure what was going to happen yesterday, some of them actually thought maybe people will be sent to the streets. Indeed, as you heard some of the supporters, they were disappointed, some of the interviews we got after that announcement. But I want to say that the supporters of the opposition or NASA need to appreciate what their leader has done.
But John, I think it's important to note that going to the streets or to picket is also a constitutional right. It is something that is within the law.
Indeed it is. But then the problem is the impact and the effect that it has to the country, the disruptive nature of our demos and demonstrations in Kenya and picketing, because normally we should be able to picket in an organized, in a way that then we don't disrupt other people's lives, because ordinarily, you know, the Constitution gives us freedoms and rights, but then they should also not be impeding on other people's rights and freedoms. So, but in Kenya, that does not happen a lot of times, especially when it comes to political demos. We have had very many instances where people have picketed, like we have had nurses. They use Kenyatta Avenue, they use all the roads in town, but they don't disrupt other people's lives. But when it is political demos in Kenya, you know what happens. A lot of looters also take advantage of
then
that.
Shouldn't we be talking about fixing how the demos are run, rather than trying to say that we should not have the demos? Then should we not be looking at how it is run and why they possibly flare up?
As we fix that, for now, because that has not been fixed, if demos were done and people went for street justice, then that would have disrupted people's lives in a big way. And that is why then it was a sigh of relief to many Kenyans who were anxious and tense about what kind of a decision or announcement that would be made. And that is why people are relieved when then Raila Odinga said that he's going to court. And it's something that is good. It's something which is very welcome. And I think it's something we really need to be happy about as a country, that finally, as my friend here says, we can understand and accept that we have institutions which have been set by the Constitution, and this country is governed by or through rule of law.
Okay. Peter, your response to that?
Really, in terms of the decision making itself, of course, there was heightened expectations from Kenyans on what will be the nature of that decision, and of course, then that created a lot of tension and all that. But we at Better Kenya, we believe that we shall not, as a country, put ourselves to that kind of circumstances or situation. We really need to ensure that we build that culture of constitutionalism. First of all, we demand that we should be demanding that the IEBC conducts a free and fair election. So it becomes part and parcel of our polity. And if there are issues in that conduct of the elections in that free and fair manner, then in my view, we need to give chance to the institutions as part of institutional development in this country. Remember, we have our constitution was just promulgated in 2010, and therefore we need time to live through some of these experiences. And therefore, the sooner we set a good example, the better. And that ties to the question of organizing civil disobedience. Remember that in yesterday's press conference, Raila said that they are going to continue with civil disobedience.
Yes, and he mentioned that this is not the only avenue that they're pursuing. And while you, now that you've brought that up, Raila Odinga, while announcing the decision to move to court, said they will have more options to draw attention to the flawed presidential election. Let's listen into what he had to say.
Peaceful assembly is guaranteed by the Constitution. So is civil disobedience. So is the right for labor to strike. And yet our people are being admonished not to protest an election they are convinced has been stolen. The state unleashed unprecedented violence against perceived NASA supporters in their homes and houses. The police have shot, bludgeoned, and cut short the lives of innocents, like the infant baby Samantha Pendo at 6 months, and Stephanie Mora Nyarangi, a young girl of 9 years, using crude weapons and live bullets. Yet as Kenyans are butchered and their civil liberties trampled upon, they are being told not to protest against a leader they believe is being imposed on them through a computer-generated fraud.
All right, so that is what he had to say. And of course, in his statement, what he meant is that they're going to pursue several avenues. But let's look at the options. What options do they have? There's a Supreme Court, which we're going to discuss how that may play out. But what other options? There's civil disobedience. And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, indeed, in Raila's press conference yesterday, he actually laid down those options. And He talked about peaceful protests. He talked about general civil disobedience, and he talked about peaceful protests, mass vigils, and all that. I think the concern is from most Kenyans is that, and based on past experiences, is that these protests are usually never peaceful. Whenever Raila calls for a protest of any governmental decision, it usually turns into street riots, running with the police, and all that. Because as a country, it seems that we haven't reached that stage where we are able to organize in peaceful protests.
But the question is, why don't we fix that? What is it that stops us as a country from having peaceful protests? I don't know if it's a case of a chicken and an egg where the police will say that there were thieves, there were thugs who were in between the protests. The protesters will say it's the police that threw the canisters and that, caused mayhem. How can we fix that?
I think to me that's a question of fact. The Constitution, first of all, guarantees everyone the right to picket, to come to the streets and
security while we do that.
Absolutely. But now the same Constitution says those rights come with responsibility. So the moment you are not exercising your rights in a peaceful manner, then you're breaching the rights of others, then now you will attract the instruments of state power, in this case, the instruments which the police have to ensure that they protect life and property. So to me, I think what we need to do is perhaps from a policy and legislative perspective, we need perhaps to intervene by providing that kind of a framework which we need to live through. What framework should we have as a society to ensure that anyone who comes to the street is able to be protected to voice his concerns? At the same time, these people are held to account in terms of eventually the decisions that come out. For instance, we need some kind of a framework where the leaders who call for these protests are taken to account if these protests go overboard. So that framework will really be helpful, and then we'll be saying that as the person who is calling for these protests, then you're responsible for the actions of the persons who you've sent to the streets.
Even the opposition leader Raila Odinga has said, I cannot control, I don't have control over people and their decisions when they're emotional. John, how do we fix this?
Mike, I would like to say, I work in town, in CBD, and where I work, I am able to see the streets of Nairobi quite clearly. And I can tell you there's no 1 week that passes without a protest in town or a picketing group for various reasons. Some of them against certain issues, maybe mainly labor issues. These are usually quite organized. In some instances, I even see them having a band. Other instances, I even see police ahead with clearing the traffic for them. So I do not think that we do not know how to organize good, peaceful
protest.
Protest. What I think happens is that when we have political demos, there's a way in which right from the demonstrators to the police, they're usually not able to be modest. They're not able to control themselves. So you'll find the police, of course, the protesters at times, they provoke the police. Then the police again, of course, overreact and they
hooligans, actually.
And that is what brings that clash. And at times, demonstrators have been known at times even to be paid to go and even cause the havoc. We have known even in this city, sometimes even people organizing those kind of demos even would tip the security machinery so that they are chased away and they tear gas and all that. Then it attracts also the attention of the media, and then the issue is amplified. Then the media is able to report it. So we do have those kind of things, and people do some of those things for a reason. And that's why politicians, to get maximum attention, they would want a demo to be at times as disruptive as possible. Yeah, that is
the attention.
Yeah.
Okay. You brought out an interesting aspect here, Peter, and this is where the politicians or whoever is in charge of that demo, because the demos here we're talking about, mainly it's the political ones that flare up, as John has rightly mentioned. How would they be held accountable? Because at the end of the day, we cannot forget the fact that you do have joyriders who are going to come on and take advantage, even as we have seen, as the announcement was being made of the presidential elections, we had flaring up of places where you also actually had thugs who are waiting for that to take advantage. So you do have joyriders.
Yeah, I think it's really something that you have to strike a delicate balance, because you want to protect the rights of people to picket. At the same time, you also want to protect the rights of others.
And the property of others, yes.
Absolutely. So to me, the starting point really is the Constitution. The Constitution contains a proper framework for holding any leader to account. If you're a state officer or a public officer, the Constitution provides the ingredients already for holding these persons to account. And we really need to start from there, because there are questions in the Constitution on the conduct of public officers. If a public officer, you conduct yourself in a manner that demeans the status of your office to the eyes of the public. You participate in destructive street protests, or you call for street protests where you know very well that there is going to be a problem. So we have to some kind of pick that and then try and legislate, or in terms of policy, develop those specific ingredients for accountability. Because if we don't do that, if we don't hold political leaders to account for the activities of their supporters when they turn into hooligans, because if these people are indeed your supporters, then you need to advise them, you need to coach them when they go to the streets. They need to behave in a particular manner. Okay. They should not expose you in a negative way. But as he said, if you have actually paid some of them to go and cause havoc,
that is the mission that you have.
Absolutely. So it means that you have certain intentions in organizing that street demo, and therefore, really the buck must stop with somebody.
With somebody. All right, John. Let's look at the history of where we are today, because this it's almost like deja vu. It's like it's happening for a second time. In 2013. Again, we were where we are today, where the presidential results were contested. The Supreme Court came in. And first of all, I don't know which way you look at it, whether we are in a civilization where we cannot have credible elections or we cannot have losers.
You know, it's good that we are going to the Supreme Court. And I agree, yes, there's a deja vu in a way. It's happening all over again. And but there are some few distinguishing factors here that we need to look at. When we had the Supreme Court case last electoral period, 2013, we did not have the kind of improvements that we have now in our electoral system. Today we have a more accountable and verifiable system in place. And of course, one of the main pillars of this case, as Raila Odinga put it yesterday, is that there were computer-generated results. In this case, it is much, much easier then to handle this case, because we do have what we are calling the Form 34As and the 34Bs. Unlike last time, where we do not have a very clear, distinctive feature on how these steps would be followed. This time around, it's a bit more clear and more accountable. And remember also, having had the case that was done right before the election, where the results at the constituency level were declared to be final, the role of IEBC has also changed pretty much, unlike again in 2013. So what we are going to see is arrows may actually even be called in, that is the returning officers at the constituency level, they may actually be called in to substantiate any figures that they may have had a problem with, or which may have a problem. And I also want to say that eventually that pillar of computer-generated results may actually wither faster than even it begins in terms of argument in court of law. Because you will remember that IEBC could not and should not and did not announce or declare results based on the computer-generated results. The announcement that was made was basically based on the 290 Form 34Bs that were presented to the IEBC by the returning officers. That is actually what was used.
And they should be signed by the returning officers.
And they should be signed not only by the returning officers, but also by the agents of the political parties. And where those forms are found to have been signed by the agents of political parties and signed by the returning officers, and of course, I'm aware even the observers do have those forms, and that's why they were actually commending the process with so much confidence. In that case, then the case will actually be pretty simple and easier to verify, because then nobody will be going into the IEBC database, because the forms are not really a database issue. They are physical. You can touch.
You can physical
see
and
them.
verifiable.
Yeah, you can see them. You can touch them. They are only 290. Then, of course, it's also much easier again to go to any 34B that may have a problem, because then all that you have to do is to call on the 34As. Again, then those ones were also prepared by presiding officers.
So there's a paper trail that you can follow that can lead you to any questionable
which is very
results.
much clear.
Peter, you're a lawyer. Looking at, NASA leaders' argument, they say that, one, this is a computer-generated results that we're dealing with. Number two, it's the lack of the Form 34As and Bs as per when they demanded them. Looking at the evidence that they have, what are we looking at now in terms of the Supreme Court now, having this evidence before them?
Thank you. Let me just complete an earlier train of thought. It is possible actually to hold political leaders to account. Look at the example of the IEBC Electoral Code of Conduct, where candidates are fined millions of shillings with a penalty. Your supporters are fought, you've engaged in violent contact. You as the leader, you are responsible. So we are fining you 3 million shillings. If you don't pay, you are disqualified automatically from running for an elective post. That, in a major way, helped to reduce incidents of campaign violence in this particular election. So it's possible to create a coercive mechanism to ensure that we have peaceful demonstrations. Coming back to this question of the Supreme Court intervention and the allegations which were raised by the Honorable Raila Odinga. It is going to be a heavy burden on NASA to prove that.
The burden of proof is
absolutely. It is really heavy. They have to discharge that burden and shift it to IEBC and the Jubilee side. And the question here is really simple. NASA have been claiming that that IEBC colluded with Jubilee to get those results. And their first point of contention is that the entire transmission system
was hacked and compromised.
That first of all, IEBC should not have projected those results without completing the verification process. And they are saying that is illegal. And in fact, at some point, they really moved to the public domain to tell that they have requested IEBC to shut down that system.
But does that make a difference, given that the final announcement is not, and they made it very clear that what was coming out was provisional results?
My take is that the NASA position is really not congruent with the legal requirements which IEBC, in my view, somehow complied with. And you can say that they really complied properly
with the law.
Because the law says that when you're transmitting presidential results, you must transmit them electronically from the polling station to the tallying center at the constituency level, then from the polling station to the national tallying center. So that transmission is what we were seeing electronically. But now for the final decision to be made, there must be some kind of verification. Again, the law says before the IEBC chairperson announces the presidential result, he must verify. And how do you verify? You verify by, and if there is complaint, the easiest way to verify your results is by getting the Form 34A and Form 34Bs and ensuring that the data which then comes into the system and the data which is in that forms tally. Now, so on that particular basis, then the burden of proof then falls on NASA. NASA what they need to do is that they need now to challenge the authenticity of the Form 34A and Form 34B. And for them to challenge the authenticity of these forms, it means they must have been present at the constituency or polling station where these forms were prepared. And if they address the objections at that polling station, these forms should be having those objections. However, the risk to NASA is that if they don't have that evidence, if they didn't have agents and therefore they are unable to prove that, so it becomes a really a tall order. On the question of the computer issues, that's a highly technical question, and we need to draw parallels to the 2013 election. In the 2013 election, the same allegation was raised this time at the Supreme Court, and Code Camp then demanded an audit of the IEBC system. But remember that one of the challenges that we face in presidential dispute determination is timelines. The timelines are so short to the point that IEBC can simply say we will be unable to do an audit within 4 or 5 days. That alone will collapse that application. So it then becomes a question of strategy. Has NASA put down proper machinery? And of course, we can't speculate because we haven't seen the evidence. But I'm assuming that they have put down proper machinery to ensure that they have their own technical presentation of this IEBC system. What is it that they are going to do to impugn what the IEBC did from a system perspective? So that means you need to have a computer expert, a systems auditor, someone who really understands these issues for you to prove that allegation that the system was interfered with. And the problem there is that, remember, hacking of an IEBC system is actually a criminal offense. And therefore, it is like it's like you're proving a crime.
Yeah, either way, if NASA have somebody who hacked into the system to prove or get them that evidence, then that is criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is like you're doomed either way. You hack the system yourself,
you're doomed.
You're doomed because you can be charged with a criminal offense. You wait for IEBC to give you the information based on their own auditing of the system. It will be too late. Perhaps they won't give it to you. So it's really a delicate balance which NASA.
Right. I'll ask you to hold that thought. We want to take a short break right here on Kivumbi 2017. And when we come back, we'll be looking also at, some statements that were made. As much as NASA says they're going to the Supreme Court, well, the question is there already aspersions cast on the Supreme Court. Remember, the former Prime Minister mentioned and said that since seeking redress from, since the President rebuked, as it were, the Supreme Court, they have not won any case. So the question, of course, is, are they going confidently to court, or are they already going feeling like they're already disadvantaged? That's some of what we're going to be talking about. And when we take a short break, we'll be right back right here on Kivumbi 2017.